Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos and welcome to this Freehold plus 22 that I did on my Brewmaster monk last week. So the affixes active this week were Necrotic and Bursting, which is a really rough combo, and then also Tyrannical and Enchanted Heavy Beguiling Pattern. The Enchanted Heavy Beguiling Pattern is a very good one. Tyrannical is a pretty hard one for high keys though, generally harder than Fortified, especially in places like Freehold. So with Necrotic and Bursting active at the same time, that's a really tough combo of things for a tank generally, because the tanks will be unhealable from the high Necrotic stacks right when all the Bursting stacks go out. So what that means is that this week is a pretty aggressive week for kiting. You can see that I'm in there for 10 seconds and then I'm pretty much immediately starting to kite. I need to drop my stacks in Necrotic. Then I can go in for a little bit again, get thrown away, and I'm just gonna keep trying to not get meleeed too much here, and avoid taking too much damage here from all the mobs. We're playing a group that's fairly good at me kiting and at helping me kite. We have a Shadow Priest who has Life Grip that can help me kite when I need to. We'll use that a couple times this dungeon. And we have a Resto Druid, which brings Typhoon and Ursul's Vortex, which are two very powerful tools for kiting. And we even have a Havoc Demon Hunter, which brings a Vengeful Retreat slow. That's a kind of unused part of the Havoc Demon Hunter kit for many groups, but it's a really powerful thing actually to do on demand. It's a 70% slow for 3 seconds, which is really big. So we started off with that first pull, and now we're going into Skycap and Crag. Skycap and Crag on Tyrannical, on High Tyrannical, is a really tough one-shot challenge. You can see every time he shoots his pistol at somebody in this first phase, that person could just die if they get hit again, if they get targeted again. But the shot is dodgeable, and we are also dropping a Darkness here in melee to avoid having, to try and just have some Darkness healing go out. Our group comp is fairly good at this again. We have like Demon Hunter, Rogue, me, all that have a pretty high chance of dodging if we get shot by the Sky Captain in this first phase. But really Furs here, our healer, needs to make sure that everybody is topped like a second after they get shot, or else they might get shot again and just die immediately. So that's a rough part of this first phase, and we're really trying to phase it out of phase 1 as fast as possible. So that's what we use our Bloodlust for. It's pretty much a mandatory Bloodlust on a Tyrannical key. To Bloodlust the first part of Skycap and Crag here. Now the second part of Skycap and Crag, there's a lot going on for this. You can see Furs here ran in, and then the poop was launched at where he was, and then he ran back out. That's because people don't really understand this about this fight, but the poops, the Vile Bombardments, are actually controllable. They're baitable. They will always be shot directly on the target that is closest to the bird here. So you can see in this instance that didn't work out all that well for us because the bird was directly over melee, so Furs wasn't able to successfully bait it. But starting now, we're going to have our melee. You can see Yoda there actually runs out, or sorry, not Yoda. Okay, yeah, Yoda's going to run out and try and bait the poop out there instead of having it land directly in melee because he saw the bird was over up there, and the bird always poops on the target that's closest underneath it. And then there are a couple of patterns the bird can get into, but ideally Furs is going to be baiting all of these poops and staying out of range of the Azurite Powder Shot. Now the Azurite Powder Shot is a one-shot on most people in this group. It's not a one-shot on Yoda because he's playing Havoc Demon Hunter, so he's got reduced magic damage taken, and I think he's actually playing a Diamond-Laced Refracting Prism tank trinket just for the purposes of surviving that ability. If he's not doing it in this key, he was on a 23 that we were doing to make it so that he could avoid taking damage here. Flaunt, by contrast, who's our Outlaw Rogue, is using Line of Sight here. So there's this little wooden part on the fence here, and that's why we're tanking the boss where we are. And he is either feinting, Cloak of Shadowsing, or he's standing outside a line of sight whenever Crag is about to shoot. And that is going to mean that he's not going to die, right? Because otherwise, it'll claim his cheat death if it hits him, and then if it hits him again, it's going to kill him. Me, I'm okay. I'm a tank. I got a lot of health. I'm kind of saving my big defensives for if I get hit by Azurite Powder Shot because the boss's melees aren't too threatening to me. Necrotic Tyrannical can be an annoying combo. You can see I've got 7 stacks of Necrotic, but just by virtue of being a Brewmaster, my stacks are going to fall off here because Brewmasters dodge a lot on single target. So you don't really need to get all that lucky to drop your stacks pretty frequently on most boss fights, as long as the boss isn't attacking too quickly. Usually Brewmasters don't even require any help. We were doing these keys earlier. We were doing them with Vengeance Demon Hunter, and that required a little bit more. We would have somebody else taunt the boss for a couple seconds, and then Nether Walk or the Resto Druid would taunt and run away, and we would use that to drop Vengeance Demon Hunter stacks. But with a Brewmaster Monk, usually the Tyrannical Necrotic combo isn't too rough. It's more the trash and the Necrotic that is a problem for me. And one of the things that I'm actually doing here on this Brewmaster, if you look up in the top left, you can see the essences and Azurite traits I'm using. I'm using the Sphere of Suppression miner to kind of try and mitigate the necrotic element of most trash pulls. I recommend that one in the minor or major slots even for necrotic weeks as a tank. Okay, so Skycarp Crag goes down. Not a super long fight there. Sometimes that one can get really hectic. People can die, and that can be bad, but especially when you have like 2 ranged players, it starts to get pretty easy. Flaunt now is going to get on his big plane and run down there and grab the Enchanted Emissary and the Enforcer. The Enchanted Emissary, not super important that he pulls it. We could pull it as well, but he's just going to run down, do a little loop, jump down again, and then eventually he's going to vanish and everything's going to stop chasing him, and none of it's in combat with us. Now, this week we have a cool little pull that we're going to do over here. We're going to pull, instead of going right like many groups often do, we're going to go left and grab, we're pulling this shipmate because it's good count, and then we're going to pull a bunch of these other enemies over here, a bunch of swabbies that aren't too threatening. They do all put out that little debuff that means that you can't jump, but if you look there, Yoda is our Havoc Demon Hunter. Havoc Demon Hunters are a spec that just jump all the time. Every Havoc Demon Hunter I've ever met keeps getting stunned by that. So Yoda has used the clever strategy here of metaing exactly when the Slippery Suds go out so that he doesn't get the debuff that means that he can't jump. That's a really, I mean, it shouldn't matter, but it was pretty funny because he was getting stunned by it when we were doing this, a different key. Now here you can see I just dropped my stacks in Necrotic. I had 24 stacks, which was pretty problematic, and there's not too much room to kite there, so I used my Ring of Peace to facilitate dropping stacks. And then for the rest of this pull, I'm just going to have to stay in and live with the stacks I have. Again, I'm going to try and avoid getting meleeed too much. I'm not really hoping to reset stacks here. I expect that I'm going to get meleeed and have my stacks go up. I'm just trying to not have them go up too high because I want to be healable during the bursting. And I want to make sure that my absorb shields and my other healing effects like that are going to still be effective. So the difference between having like 10 and 20 stacks there makes a 5 stack of bursting into something that will kill me versus something that won't kill me, or something that'll, really threaten me into something that won't. Now we're going to pull this Trapper little pull here with some Shiprats. Shiprats are pretty problematic in that they'll stack up Necrotic very quickly on you, so it's really good to get them out of there, ideally within an AoE stun or two, and getting them out of the game. Now, one thing we also want here is we want 2 of the Shiprats from this patrol, because we need them for count for later. So I'm just going to use Ring of Peace to separate them from the rest of the patrol because it's not linked. And then we'll bring them in, and that's going to allow us to get... This is going to get us all the trash we need, basically, for the rest of the dungeon. It's possible to avoid getting either the shipmate that I pulled in earlier or the 2 rats, but it would then require us to be a little bit more precise at the very end of the dungeon. When we use a Ravager to kill some mobs, we would need to make sure that it hit exactly one specific mob, instead of now we have a little bit more freedom there. Okay, so this pull, we're just going to CC that brine scale out there because we don't want to fight it while we have a tides involved in the pull. And we're going to pull everything else in. Emissary of the Tides hit me very hard. They hit every tank very hard, but that makes this pull into a bit of a threat. So ideally the Tides is going to die first, and then I'll be able to kite a little bit more effectively. Necrotic is also a rough combination when there's Emissary of the Tides active, because it means that the rest of the pack isn't slowable. And slowing the rest of the pack is a pretty useful way to avoid getting killed during Necrotic. It means that I can kite a little bit more effectively. It means that I can use something like Ring of Peace and actually keep the mobs from getting onto me. And here I'm just going to drop my stacks. Dropping stacks on Necrotic bursting in particular is something that you should do earlier rather than later. You really don't want to get caught in this spot where you have 3 bursting stacks and also a bunch of Necrotic stacks. Now we're just going into this brine scale and pulling it with a bunch of neutrals over on the side. Neutrals are, these are still worth pulling this week, but because otherwise you're just going to get them during the boss fight probably. But they're kind of annoying because they do give out a lot of, these sort of small mobs that give little amounts of count. This is one of the worst weeks for them, one of the weeks where they're actually pretty challenging because both bursting and necrotic are real affixes, no matter how small the mob is that they're on. Okay, so this pull, this pull's going to go a little wrong. I think this is where we wipe. No spoilers. There's a lot of, intricacy with the pull here. I'm going to try and do a pull here with, Enchanted Emissary, a couple casters, and a couple harpooners. So this is 10 mobs, although that one scrapper didn't pull over there because that's not actually linked to that pull. So 9 mobs, plus an Enchanted Emissary that needs to get knocked away. So you can see my stagger already jumps up to pretty high. I'm already low on brews here, starting to kite. But one thing with kiting with harpooners in play is that they can just pull you back in. Now, luckily, I didn't reset my necrotic on that. But because the pack has gotten the spread as much as it has here, there's a Frost Blast that goes off right there, and that slays me and our healer, and that's going to be the end of this pull. So this is a spot where, you know, many would potentially wipe the key here. It's a fairly high key. It's a 22. It's not as high as possible, but you know, it's a pretty high key, and there's often not room to wipe and continue, especially like, you know, you're gonna have to run back and redo an annoying skip of some kind. So these are, you know, these are times where it's important to immediately figure out, okay, what, you know, can we still time this key? And if so, we need to figure out exactly what we need to do to get back to this pool as fast as possible. It's not a time to like spend a minute talking about what happened or whatever. We can spend that time after the key is over. But for now, we just need to figure out like, all right, what's the plan from here? You know, how are we going to continue? I shouldn't have released probably. That was probably unnecessary, but because we ended up having, you know, stealthers go back and res everybody, but it worked out. It didn't end up costing us all that much time. And this time, now that enchanted is gone, I'm just going to take this pack upwards instead and bring it into a pack that doesn't have a harpooner. I still think that the original pull with the harpooners was maybe like can work, but it does require people to be specifically watching for those frost blasts, picking off people at the very end of the pull. Because without that frost blast, I think we would have actually stabilized that pull. I was dropping necrotic stacks, so I think I would have been okay. Now, once again, anytime I'm pulling more than like 5 mobs, I'm pretty much kiting as soon as I've, you know, as soon as I've done like 2 keg smashes, I'm out of here. Luckily, okay, so Brewmaster, you know, not a class like Paladin that has a bunch of ways to reset necrotic just with a button, but is one of the best classes in the game for kiting. Both Chi Torpedo or Roll and then Ring of Peace are great ways to open up some distance from mobs and then keep them clumped far away from you. So as long as there aren't enemies in the pack that are immune to slows or Ring of Peace, this is usually a spec that can actually kite. It does mean that I'm going to do fairly low damage compared to a normal week, right? In a normal week, I'd be able to run in and stay in the pack and do damage, but this week I'm pretty often kiting. But you know, that's worthwhile, right? That's what you got to do to time these keys this week, and that plays around 2 of the affixes, right? The affixes all cost time in some way or another, and that's, you know, in this case, most of the pain is felt on my end of the damage meter, but that's okay. So this pull is going to go down, and then we're gonna do the RP event, and we're gonna do the boss. For those wondering, you know, this is, I guess you might be a little surprised to see Brewmaster content on this channel if you're used to seeing mostly rogue content. I still mostly play my rogue in high keys, but I figured it would be interesting to show a tank perspective video, so that's why I'm making this one. But you know, fear not, there will still primarily be rogue perspective keys. I might make some Shaman or Paladin ones as well, or whatever else I end up playing. Just because I feel like, you know, the 20th rogue video versus the first Brewmaster video, I can maybe, it would be interesting, I think, for a lot of people to see some other specs on this channel, so that's why I'm making this one here. Although it's worth noting, I could have also, earlier in this VOD, for instance, from my stream, I could have picked out the same key as an Outlaw Rogue and shown that as well. Okay, so we've all taken the drink here. And now we're going to do the Council of Captains. Normally, this is a really rough tyrannical boss, but this week Eudora is friendly. And Eudora being friendly is like a double whammy bonus for us, because not only do we not have to deal with Eudora, but that means that every other barrel smash from Raoul gets stunned by Eudora. So we just actually don't have to worry about, you know, running away from him nearly as much as we normally would. One thing we're also abusing this fight is we have our ranged DPS. Sorry, we have our Shadow Priest and our healer up on top of a little house there, you could see. And by standing up there, they are going to mean that Jolly is going to try, he's going to both throw his blades at them, and then you can see they just move to the other side of the roof there, and he's going to try and charge them. And when he tries to charge them, he's just going to decide that he can't actually run up there, and that's going to pretty much remove that mechanic from the fight. And it's going to mean that, like you see there, he just casts Cutting Surge and then just decides to not bother. So that's a really useful thing about using that. He just keeps trying to cast Cutting Surge. So very great game mechanic to cleverly use there. Would recommend doing that. If you have ranged in your group, all they have to do is just keep moving back and forth on that roof. One thing about this strategy is our Shadow Priest, Evade, is using the Essence of the Focusing Iris Major. So if he wants to hit both these bosses, I actually have to pull them next to the house for him to be able to beam them. So he calls for me to do that a couple times throughout this fight. And that's what you might see me, for instance, move the bosses both to right under the house so that he can hit them with his beam. All right, I'm now gonna cough briefly. Ooh, excuse me. I'm gonna have a nice drink of my soda. Oh, somebody just resubbed to my Twitch stream. This content is, by the way, taken from my Twitch stream. If you're interested, twitch.tv/Dratnos. I usually do keys and raid and stuff on there. So if you're interested in seeing these happen live, that's the place to go. That's why, for instance, there's some chat that you can see up there. That's on my stream. Sorry about that. If that's annoying to you, it's actually pretty difficult for me to record while I'm streaming and not capture all the stuff that's going on in my stream. I know I could do it, but I feel like it would actually take a lot more processing power than just, capturing the same thing that my stream was doing. Anyways, that little diversion aside, this fight, there's a couple of different brews that get thrown in from the bartender. There's a crit brew, a haste brew, and a dot brew. And the dot brew is actually the one that will speed up the fight the most. You just want to make sure that you bring the bosses into the dot brew and you take them out of the other brews. And then the other brews, the crit and the haste ones, are good ones for people to grab. You'll notice there were a couple of little racing flags around there. Racing flags are a toy from, well, they're not actually a toy, but they're like this consumable you can buy from the Order of the Jade Serpent rep back in Mista Pandaria. And there's a couple different uses for them. Rogues can use them to shadow step if they're not playing Outlaw. But our rogue, of course, is playing Outlaw. So the reason we have flags going down in this group is somebody's using the Aquapotent Nautilus trinket. And that is a trinket that sends out a little wave to a target, and then it bounces back. And by targeting a flag on the other side of the pack, you actually can double hit the pack because the wave will pass through the pack and then come back to you. So that's what I think it's our healer who's using that. The Aquapotent Nautilus over there, you can see there's a flag that he's placed there, and he's just standing so that the pack is between him and the flag, and he sends a little wave over at the flag, and then it comes back through the pack at him. And by doing that, he's actually getting very big damage on his Aquapotent Nautilus throughout this whole dungeon. So that's a really cool little trinket you can get from the raid. And if you do get it, mastering that usage of the flag is a really good way to get some more damage out of it. It'll like double your damage from that trinket. You can also, in a pinch, target a friendly with it. It can target friendlies or allies, so you can make sure you can just stand on the other side of the pack as one of your friends and get the same effect. But it's actually better if it's farther away, because then you get even more duration on it. So that's why this flag is in this really weird spot over here, and that's why you've been seeing weird flags in weird spots. Okay, now this pull is sketchy. This is one of those pulls that we were doing this when we had a Vengeance Demon Hunter, and it was working reasonably well because the Vengeance Demon Hunter, like in meta, this was a place where you could commit as meta and be very tanky for a while. But for me, I don't really have as many powerful big cooldowns. I have Dampen Harm and Fort Brew, but my Fort Brew is on cooldown. You can see Evade has died there. One of the things with this pull is that it has a Tides Emissary and Fixate mobs, so there's no way to stop those Fixates except for Soothes when they are near that Tides Emissary. And Soothes each cost a global, and there's 2 Fixators in there. So this pull got pretty sketchy pretty quick. We ended up using our Battle Res on Evade, but now you can see I'm starting to be under some threat here. So I'm just trying to desperately kite, avoid taking too much damage. But again, there's a Tides Emissary in that pull, so that meant so they couldn't be slowed. So again, I'm just kind of continuing to avoid taking melees as much as possible, because you can see as soon as I get in melee with all these mobs, my health bar starts going way down, my stagger bar starts going way up, and I'm low on brews here. Here comes the Shadow Priest utility. So one of the things you can do here is you can call for like life grips from your Shadow Priest, or any priest can do this, but it's a really useful thing that they do bring. And if you're in voice chat, you can just use it to, get yoinked on out of the pull, and then you're immediately safe. So that's a really good thing that is brought by Shadow Priest. Again, the pack is starting to die. It's very important that I drop my necrotic stacks here so that I'm healable through these bursting stacks. Otherwise, I'm just going to take too much damage from them. And as a Brewmaster, in particular, like my Celestial Fortune, my Null Barrier, my Edicts of the Faithless, all of these effects, and my Bloodthirsty Urchin, they all get nerfed by necrotic. So I'm very, very squishy when I have a lot of stacks of necrotic, whereas when I have no stacks of necrotic, I'm very, very easy to heal, and I get a lot of passive healing on myself. So those are factors that make it very, very important for me to drop stacks before before those bursting stacks come out. Okay, so now it's turtle time. We're gonna do the turtle with some friends. This is a sketchy pull. In particular, this pull is sketchy for, one of the things that Brewmaster does is on single target, we have an easy time dodging a lot of attacks, because every time we don't dodge, we get an increased chance to dodge the next attack on us. That's the way that Brewmaster Mastery works. But when there's this many small mobs in with some big mobs, these small mobs are consuming my dodges, so I'm actually getting hit by a much bigger, more hits than I should be from the big mobs, right? And that means that my health is under a lot more threat than it would be if I didn't pull those neutrals with the big mobs. So even though the neutrals aren't hitting very hard, they added a lot of damage to this pull, and they added a lot of necrotic stacks to me. So now it's vitally important that I don't get hit by either of these mobs until I drop necrotic stacks. Evade there, another life grip, grips me through the mob. I could have got meleeed by that mob while I was getting gripped through it, but luckily I didn't, so it turns out that it looks like a really genius play, although it was pretty risky. It could have turned bad there. but it might have been necessary. I might have had no way to avoid getting hit if I didn't get gripped there. I'm not 100% sure. We could look back, I guess, and see. I don't know. I think I might have been able to reset. Anyways, a Crusher and a Turtle here is a pretty rough combination for a lot of melee specs, but both Havoc Demon Hunter and Outlaw Rogue have a pretty safe way. Ooh, that was bad. I should not have Chi Torpedoed there. Both Havoc Demon Hunter and Outlaw Rogue have a pretty easy time here, still doing their effective damage to these two targets, even with all the ground denial going around. Depending on your composition, you might have a much harder time fighting these two mobs at the same time. But the extended range on the Outlaw Rogue and the Demon Hunter mobility and the way that they just stand between the two of them for a blade dance and then they just go back to hitting one target means that they're they don't have too much trouble with this pull, still doing effective damage. There are a lot of pulls like that where you can pull two mobs at the same time and it looks okay, but you're losing too much damage and it's not actually worth it, right? Like if you pull two mobs and they cause you to do half as much damage because you're doing twice as many mechanics or whatever, and you're dodging for half the time, that actually is not worthwhile, right? That's not a speed increase. But in that case, it was worthwhile. It was good to do because nobody lost too much damage from fighting those two mobs, even though it looked like we were dodging all the time. I lost a lot of damage, but that doesn't matter. I'm the tank, and I'm gonna have a hard time anyways this week. Like it's nice for me to just be kiting pretty much always, and anytime I'm kiting, Furs can just be doing big damage as well because he's a Resto Druid, and Resto Druids can pretty easily do pretty big damage. As you can see, like here, he's opening reasonably well on the boss, and he can maintain a lot of damage on the boss with just a couple globals even. Okay, so Trothak, a fairly easy boss, especially for Brewmasters, because, well, even for everybody on Necrotic this week, it's pretty easy to reset stacks because he just does the Shark Tornado for 6 seconds, so it's very likely that you'll be able to drop stacks in that Shark Tornado and when he throws the Shark. One little thing that you may not know is that the cadence of this fight is pretty set. It basically always does the exact same rotation. There's a couple of points of randomness to it, but basically he'll throw that long-nosed shark. That long-nosed shark will be out for a while. He'll do his Shark Tornado, and then he will either pick up his shark or he'll throw his short-nosed shark. The short-nosed shark is only ever out for a short amount of time. This is how you remember it, okay? The short-nosed shark is out for a short time, and the long-nosed shark is out for a long time. And that's the way to keep in mind that, you basically shouldn't kite the short-nosed shark into blood pools. You should save those for the long-nosed shark, and just let the short-nosed shark jump a couple times, and the boss will pick it up almost immediately afterwards. Whereas the long-nosed shark is always the one that's out during the Shark Tornado, so it's out for a long time. But there's a little bit of randomness. Again, sometimes the two sharks are out together for a brief amount of time, and sometimes they're not. That is the RNG in the fight. But outside of that, it's a very strict cadence that always is repeated on this fight. Okay, one thing about Tyrannical that's kind of annoying is that just the boss fights take forever. I guess one thing that's worth talking about here is you can see Evade is cross-dotting the target dummies that are up there. That's a very useful strategy for a couple specs. Shadow Priest, Elemental Shaman, some Warlock specs, I think Affliction and Destruction both benefit from that also. Just keeping some dots on those target dummies that are up there on the sides are a single target damage increase for these specs, so it's a worthwhile thing to do. So if you're playing with those sorts of range specs, they will usually stand on that part of the room, and you should kite the sharks in the other parts of the room and kind of leave that part of the room to them so that they can target those two dummies and keep increasing their damage that way. Let's skip ahead a little bit here. And just skip ahead to the end of this boss fight, because there's really, on Tyrannical, the boss is just, it's super boring. After the first 50% of the boss fight, you're just ready for it to be dead already. So let's just skip ahead to the end of this boss fight, because there's not really all that much more to talk about. You just keep rinsing and repeating, doing the exact same strategy. Now we're going to run up and out this way. We're only playing one rogue, and there's 2 spots that we need to do skips left. So we're going to use our Shroud here, and then we're going to have to Be Clever for the next skip that we want to do. So this skip, we really don't want to fight that Tides pack there. Tides are really annoying, so pulling as few of them as possible is a really good strategy this dungeon. Now this is a finesse pull here. We want to get each of these Ravagers to cast Painful Motivation and affect themselves and 2 other non-Ravager targets. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to taunt this Buccaneer over to this Ravager pull, and Flaunt is going to keep the other Ravager over there and have it do the Painful Motivation on the 2 CC'd mobs over there. So I pull over the Buccaneer, we break the CCs here. This Ravager will immediately cast Painful Motivation because Painful Motivations will cast after the mob has been in combat for a certain amount of time, and it's been in combat for that long because it's been paralyzed, and it's in combat while it's paralyzed. Flaunt does go down here to the bursting stacks. That does happen. That is a shame. But, you know, still a big time saver. We just killed 6 enemies in, 20 seconds, when normally that would take a minute or whatever on a key of this level. Now, we don't have a shroud here, so we've got to find a way to get through. We got to wait for this patrol to go away, and then we're going to use levitate to get over to the other side here. We're going to do a levitate jump. You can do this with slow fall, levitate. You can get up with a warlock gateway, or heroic leap, or fell rush. Fell rush has already gotten Yoda to the other side, for instance, you can see here. So yeah, we're just going to jump towards the X marker here. I mess it up here. I don't get my levitate in time, but one thing we know is that Shadow Priests have life grip. So I'm just going to let everybody else get up there because they're all stealthers or whatever, and then just get life gripped up, and we'll pull the last boss now. Now, this last boss is a little bit of a necrotic challenge in the last phase of the fight, because in that last phase, his melee attack speed doubles. So that's a spot where you'll probably want to save some defensives, although luckily that phase only lasts like 30 seconds and then he's dead anyways. Outside of that, the main name of the game on this fight is disciplined cannon placement, making sure that you're not, covering your whole area here with cannons, because there's a pretty limited space that you're fighting this boss in. And once you get below 60%, he starts dropping these cannon shots on everybody. One also annoying thing there is that it does snap you to it if it can't find a path to you. So that's always, that can lead to you getting hit in the back in a surprise way. So be careful as a tank there when you're getting knocked back by the Swiftwind Saber. So again, first phase here, very, very easy, right? Swiftwind Saber and Cannon Barrage both only target one person. Let's skip ahead a little bit here to the second phase, which starts at 60%. Okay, so second phase starts. He casts his loaded dice thing, and now the Swiftwind Saber is going to come out and go in all directions, so it's much more likely to hit everybody. It is possible to see where it's going to go and dodge it. Like you can see Furs was doing that there, but in practice, it's pretty difficult to do that, and most folks don't end up bothering. It's usually not too much damage. However, if you're about to die, if your healer's dead, for instance, that might be something that is worth doing. Okay, so we're getting these cannon barrages on everybody now. Every time a cannon barrage comes out, the old fire spots will pretty much immediately start to despawn. So it's kind of okay to just walk towards where the old fire was, because it pretty much immediately goes away. And this means that you can basically just keep using a 2 movement rotation and just keep going from one spot to another. I like to do these 2 corners of the deck over here and just kind of always be in one of these corners and then go out and then back in. Evade, as a ranged DPS, likes to just stand out by himself and not move with the group, because moving with the group costs him more damage, and I think that's a reasonable thing to do. Now, one other thing worth noting in this group is we do have a dribbling ink pod in the group. You can see on the boss's frames here that he's accumulating stacks of dribbling ichor, and that is something that we are going to play to our advantage. So when the boss reaches 30.5% health, he's going to cast his next loaded dice cast, and that's going to cause him to take double damage. But the ink pod is going to proc when the boss reaches 29.5% health. So we need to make sure that the boss does not get below 29.5% health before he finishes casting his loaded dice here. So as soon as this loaded dice happens, we all stop our damage, and we're going to wait for it to get that cast done before we push it below 29.5, and then bang, you can see immediately 5% of its health goes away, all from that one, dribbling ink pod, conductive ink dot, all there. And that's a really useful thing to do. It's not, the end of the world if it pops early. You only lose a little bit of damage, but if you have more than one ink pod in your group, it's a really important thing to actually do on this fight. So I would recommend doing that. Unless, you're playing with your friends or whatever and you want to make them do no damage, in which case, don't do that to them. Whew, nearly died on that part there. As you can see, the boss really starts autoing very quickly here. But, we're fine. Furs just doing damage, sitting there in cat form. He's sure I'll be fine. Excuse me. Okay, so dungeon almost over. We do need to collect another 11 count, another 12 count, which is 3 mobs. Luckily, a Ravager is going to kill itself and 2 other mobs. So all we have to do over here is get in combat with the Ravager, and then the Ravager is going to cast Painful Motivation, and then Yoda's going to kick it because he made a little oopsie there. So that means that we have to wait a little bit. If that Painful Motivation hadn't been kicked, the dungeon would be over by now, but instead we have to wait for it to recast Painful Motivation, which is going to take like 15 seconds before that's off cooldown again, and it will try again to cast Painful Motivation. So once again, all I'm doing here is just tanking, staying alive. Painful Motivation goes out, the mobs all die, and the dungeon is over. and that's the 22 done on the Brewmaster. So hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, let me know. Let me know if you liked seeing from the perspective of a different spec. And I'm sorry about all the coughing. I've been a little sick recently. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.